His hands were shaking, not the controlled tremor of nerves or anticipation, but the involuntary rhythm of a disease that had been slowly consuming him for over a decade. Muhammad Ali stood alone at the top of the Olympic Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, holding a torch that weighed less than 3 pounds but felt like 1,000. Below him, 80,000 people sat in absolute silence. Around the world, 3 billion viewers held their breath. It was July 19, 1996, and the man who once called himself the greatest was about to perform the most difficult act of his life. Not throwing a punch, not dancing around a ring, but simply standing still while the world watched him struggle. The flame flickered in his trembling grip. His face, once animated with the lightning-quick expressions of a showman, was now frozen into what doctors call the Parkinsonian mask, a blank, expressionless stare that betrayed none of the emotions burning inside. But his eyes, those eyes that had stared down Sonny Liston and George Foreman, they were alive, defiant, unbroken. As the Olympic cauldron waited to be lit, as the ceremony held its breath, Muhammad Ali prepared to show the world what courage really looked like. But nobody in that stadium knew the full story of how he got there. Nobody knew that just 6 months earlier, Ali had been living in virtual isolation, refusing almost all public appearances. Nobody knew about the secret meetings, the desperate phone calls, the moment Ali almost said no to the biggest honor of his life, and nobody knew what it was costing him, physically and emotionally, to stand on that platform with the eyes of humanity upon him. This is the untold story of the night Muhammad Ali lit the Olympic flame, the night the world saw a legend face his greatest opponent, not in a boxing ring, but in front of 3 billion witnesses who would never forget what they saw. 10 years before that night, in 1986, Muhammad Ali had quietly disappeared from public life. The transformation had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Fans who saw him at autograph signings noticed his handwriting getting shakier. Reporters conducting interviews noticed his speech slowing, words coming out softer, less animated. His movements, once fluid as water, became rigid, stiff. The man who had floated like a butterfly now walked like he was moving through molasses. The diagnosis had come in 1984, though many suspect the disease had been present years earlier. Parkinson's disease, a degenerative disorder of the nervous system that attacks the brain's ability to control movement. The official story was that it wasn't related to boxing, that Ali had a genetic predisposition, but those who knew him, who had watched him absorb thousands of punches over a 21-year career, they had their doubts. His doctor would later estimate that Ali had taken more than 200,000 blows to the head during his time in the ring. The rope-a-dope strategy he used against George Foreman, letting opponents punch themselves into exhaustion while he covered up, it had worked brilliantly in Zaire, but every shot that landed, even the ones absorbed by his arms and gloves, sent shockwaves through his brain. By the early 1990s, Ali rarely left his farm in Berrien Springs, Michigan. He would spend hours sitting in silence, watching old fights on television, his face expressionless, but his hands occasionally mimicking the movements he saw on screen. His wife, Lonnie, became his primary caregiver and fierce protector. She turned away most interview requests, most appearance offers. The world that had once consumed Ali, that had lifted him up as a symbol of black pride and athletic excellence, now felt too heavy to carry. He was tired, not just physically, but spiritually. The constant stares, the way people would whisper when they saw him shuffle past, the pity in their eyes, it wore him down. When the Atlantic Committee for the Olympic Games began planning the 1996 opening ceremony, they knew they wanted something special, something that would capture the spirit of the Games, the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. A short list of potential torchlighters was drawn up: Evander Holyfield, the heavyweight champion from Atlanta; Hank Aaron, the baseball legend who broke Babe Ruth's home run record; Carl Lewis, the track and field icon. All worthy choices, all safe choices. But Billy Payne, the CEO of the Atlanta Organizing Committee, had a different vision. He wanted Muhammad Ali. His staff thought he was insane. Ali hadn't been seen in public for months. His Parkinson's had progressed to the point where simple tasks were becoming difficult. How could he possibly climb the stairs to the cauldron platform? How could he hold the torch steady enough to light the flame? What if he fell? What if he dropped the torch? What if 3 billion people watched Muhammad Ali fail in the most public way imaginable? Payne's response was simple. Then they'll see what real courage looks like. The first approach was made in January 1996, a phone call to Lonnie Ali, a respectful request for a meeting. Lonnie's immediate answer was no, absolutely not. She had seen what public appearances did to her husband, the way they drained him, the way his symptoms worsened under stress. She wasn't going to put him through that, not even for the Olympics. But Billy Payne was persistent. He flew to Michigan personally, sat in Ali's living room, explained his vision. He told Ali that this wasn't about showing the world a champion. It was about showing them a warrior, someone who refused to quit even when his body betrayed him, someone who could inspire not through victory, but through simple, dignified endurance. Ali listened in silence. His tremor had worsened over the years. His hand shook constantly now, a rhythmic oscillation that only stopped when he slept. His voice, once the loudest in any room, had become a whisper, but his mind was still sharp, still calculating. He looked at Lonnie, then at Payne. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He smiled. Not the wide, performative grin of his youth, but a small, knowing smile. The smile of a man who understood that this was his final round, his last chance to show the world who he was. Not Muhammad Ali the boxer, but Muhammad Ali the human being. He said yes, but he had one condition. Nobody could know, not the media, not the other athletes, not even the Olympic Committee members. It had to be a secret, a surprise, because Ali understood the power of theater, the power of the unexpected. He had built his entire career on it, and he was going to use it one last time. The training began immediately, not physical training in the traditional sense, but preparation. Ali practiced holding weighted objects for extended periods, building up his arm strength so he could keep the torch steady. He worked with physical therapists on his walking, on his balance, on the specific movements required to light the cauldron. Every session was painful. His muscles, weakened by years of Parkinson's, would cramp and spasm. His hands would shake so violently that he'd have to stop and rest. But he kept going. Lonnie watched it all with a mixture of pride and fear. Pride that her husband still had that fire inside him, that competitive drive that refused to accept defeat. But fear of what would happen if something went wrong. What if he couldn't do it? What if the world saw him fail? Ali had a different perspective. He told her, "I've already lost everything the disease can take, my speed, my voice, my grace, but it can't take my heart, and that's what they're going to see." As the Olympics approached, the speculation about who would light the torch intensified. The Atlanta Committee kept their secret perfectly. Every leaked rumor mentioned someone else. Muhammad Ali's name never came up. He was in the public consciousness, retired from public life, a ghost of the past. On the night of July 19th, the opening ceremony proceeded according to plan. 80,000 people packed into the stadium, billions watching on television across the globe, the parade of nations, the speeches, the music, and then the moment everyone waited for, the Olympic torch relay. The final runner, a young woman named Teresa Edwards, a basketball player and Olympic gold medalist, carried the torch into the stadium. The crowd roared. She ran a victory lap, torch held high, soaking in the applause. And then she approached a platform at the edge of the stadium where someone was waiting in the shadows. The cameras hadn't revealed who it was yet. The lighting was deliberately kept dim. Edwards climbed the stairs, torch in hand, and the world waited to see who would have the honor of lighting the Olympic flame. And then the lights came up. Muhammad Ali stood there, his white Olympic jacket crisp and clean, his face expressionless, but his eyes burning with intensity.
For a moment, the stadium went completely silent. Not the silence of anticipation, but the silence of shock, of disbelief, of recognition. And then the roar began. It started in one section, a wave of sound that rippled through the stadium like thunder, people leaping to their feet, hands flying to mouths in surprise, tears already streaming down faces. The roar built and built until it was deafening, a wall of sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the stadium. The television broadcasters were speechless. Bob Costas, calling the ceremony for NBC, could barely get words out. "Oh my God," he whispered, "it's Ali."
Teresa Edwards handed the torch to Muhammad Ali. Their hands touched for a moment, and she could feel his tremor, the constant shaking that he couldn't control. But when he gripped the torch, something changed. His jaw set, his shoulders squared. The tremor didn't stop, but it slowed, not through any medical miracle, but through sheer force of will. Ali began his walk to the cauldron mechanism. It was only about 15 feet, but to him it felt like miles. Each step was deliberate, carefully placed. His Parkinson's affected his gait, made his feet shuffle rather than stride, but he kept moving. The torch in his right hand shook violently, flame dancing and flickering. The camera zoomed in, showing the world every tremor, every shake, every moment of struggle. And the world watched in absolute silence. In living rooms across America, families sat frozen in front of their televisions. In bars and restaurants, conversations stopped mid-sentence. In countries where the Olympics were broadcast, from Japan to Brazil to South Africa, billions of people held their breath. They had come to watch an athletic spectacle, but they were witnessing something far more profound. They were watching a man who had lost almost everything, refused to be defeated. Ali reached the mechanism that would light the cauldron. It was a simple device, a long fuse that he needed to touch with his torch. The designers had built in some tolerance, knowing that precision would be difficult. But even with that margin of error, this would require steady hands, and Ali's hands were anything but steady. He lifted the torch. His right arm shook so violently that the flame wavered and dipped. For a moment it looked like he might drop it. Gasps echoed through the stadium. But Ali adjusted his grip, brought his left hand up to steady his right wrist, and held the torch over the fuse. 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. The flame danced, the torch shook, but Ali held it there, waiting for the connection, waiting for the spark. And then it happened. The fuse caught. A small flame at first, barely visible, but it raced up the mechanism, climbed higher and higher until it reached the massive cauldron at the top of the stadium. And then, in a burst of light and fire, the Olympic flame ignited. The crowd exploded. Not applause, not cheering, but something primal. A roar of triumph, of joy, of collective catharsis. Strangers hugged each other. Athletes from competing nations wept openly. In the stands, grown men who had watched Ali fight in his prime buried their faces in their hands and sobbed. Muhammad Ali stood there, torch still in his hand, his face still expressionless due to the Parkinson's mask, but a single tear rolled down his cheek. Whether it was from emotion or a symptom of the disease, nobody could say. Perhaps it was both. He didn't wave, he didn't bow. He simply stood there, bathed in the light of the Olympic flame, and let the world see him, not as he was, not as they remembered him, but as he had become, a warrior who refused to surrender, a champion who knew that true greatness isn't measured in victories, but in the courage to keep fighting when you've already lost. What the television cameras didn't show was what happened after Ali descended from the platform, how his legs nearly gave out on the stairs, caught only by the quick reflexes of a security guard, how he had to sit down immediately, his body shaking from the exertion and stress,
how Lonnie rushed to him, her face a mixture of pride and concern, holding his trembling hands in hers.
The medical team had been on standby, ready to intervene if needed. Ali's neurologist later admitted that he had advised against the appearance, warning that the stress could trigger a severe episode. But Ali had ignored the advice, just as he had ignored the advice of trainers who told him not to fight George Foreman, of managers who told him not to speak out against the Vietnam War, of the entire establishment that told him he couldn't be himself. In the days after the ceremony, the world reacted. The image of Ali lighting the torch became instantly iconic, replayed on news broadcasts around the globe. Letters poured into the Olympic Committee and to Ali's home, thousands of them, from Parkinson's patients who found hope in what they saw, from elderly people who understood what it meant to lose physical ability but keep your dignity, from young athletes who learned that there are battles worth fighting even when you can't win. But there were also the critics, sports commentators who questioned whether it was appropriate to showcase someone in such obvious physical decline, medical ethicists who debated whether Ali had been exploited, put on display for emotional impact. Some accused the Olympic Committee of using his disease for ratings, of turning a man's suffering into entertainment. Billy Payne responded to the criticism with a simple statement: "We didn't put Muhammad Ali on that platform to show the world a sick man. We put him there to show the world an undefeated spirit." And Ali himself, in one of his few interviews after the event, whispered a response that silenced most of his critics. "Parkinson's may have taken my body," he said, his voice barely audible, "but it can never touch my soul." What most people don't know is that the 1996 Olympic performance took a significant toll on Ali's health. In the weeks that followed, his symptoms worsened. The tremor in his hands became more pronounced. His mobility decreased. His doctors noted a marked acceleration in the disease's progression. Whether it was caused by the stress of the event or simply the natural course of Parkinson's is impossible to say, but those close to Ali noticed the change. Yet when asked if he regretted it, if he wished he hadn't put himself through that ordeal, Ali's answer was always the same: no, never. Because what happened in Atlanta wasn't about him, it was about everyone who was watching, everyone who had ever been told they couldn't do something, everyone who had ever faced an opponent they couldn't defeat. The scientific reality of Parkinson's disease is brutal and unforgiving. It's a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that destroys dopamine-producing neurons in the brain. These neurons control movement, and as they die, the body loses its ability to coordinate action. The tremor that defines the disease is just the most visible symptom. Beneath it lies a cascade of problems: muscle rigidity, slowed movement, impaired balance, changes in speech, difficulty swallowing, sleep disorders, depression. For a man like Ali, whose entire identity was built on physical excellence, on speed and grace and power, Parkinson's was the cruelest possible fate. Every day was a reminder of what he had lost. Every tremor, every shuffled step, every slurred word was evidence of the price he had paid for greatness. The scientific reality of Parkinson's disease is brutal and unforgiving. It's a progressive neurodegenerative disorder that destroys dopamine-producing neurons in the brain. These neurons control movement, and as they die, the body loses its ability to coordinate action. The tremor that defines the disease is just the most visible symptom. Beneath it lies a cascade of problems: muscle rigidity, slowed movement, impaired balance, changes in speech, difficulty swallowing, sleep disorders, depression. For a man like Ali, whose entire identity was built on physical excellence, on speed and grace and power, Parkinson's was the cruelest possible fate. Every day was a reminder of what he had lost. Every tremor,
Every shuffled step, every slurred word was evidence of the price he had paid for greatness. The question of whether boxing caused Ali's Parkinson's remains controversial. Officially, the answer is no. Ali's doctors have stated that he suffers from Parkinson's syndrome, possibly related to repeated head trauma, but not classic Parkinson's disease. The distinction is technical and to most people meaningless. The result is the same. The man who took pride in never being knocked down, who absorbed punishment that would have destroyed lesser fighters, was ultimately defeated by the accumulated damage of 1,000 battles.
But here's what the medical debates miss. Here's what the scientific analysis can't capture. Muhammad Ali knew the cost. He knew, even in his prime, that every punch he took, every blow to the head, every round he spent on the ropes letting George Foreman tee off on him would have consequences. He knew, and he chose to fight anyway. Because to Ali, some things were worth the sacrifice. His refusal to fight in Vietnam cost him 3.5 years of his prime, millions of dollars, his heavyweight title, and the respect of half of America. But he did it anyway, because his principles mattered more than his career. His decision to keep fighting into his late 30s, long after he should have retired, cost him his health. But he did it anyway, because he wasn't ready to let go of the thing that defined him. And his choice to stand on that Olympic platform in 1996, knowing it would drain him, knowing it would accelerate his decline, knowing the world would see him at his weakest, he did it anyway, because Muhammad Ali understood something that most people spend their whole lives trying to learn. That greatness isn't about being undefeated, it's about how you handle defeat. It's about standing up one more time than you're knocked down. It's about facing impossible odds and refusing to quit. The images from that night in Atlanta tell a story that transcends sports, transcends disease, transcends any single moment. They show an old warrior, diminished by time and illness, standing in front of the entire world and declaring through his very presence, "I am still here. You have not broken me. You will not break me." In the years that followed, Ali's public appearances became rarer. The Parkinson's progressed, as it always does. His speech deteriorated further. His mobility declined. By the early 2000s, he was largely confined to his home, able to venture out only with significant assistance. The man who had once been the most recognizable face on the planet became a memory, a legend, someone younger generations knew only from grainy footage and documentary films. He passed away on June 3, 2016, at the age of 74. The cause was septic shock, a complication from his Parkinson's. But in a very real sense, Muhammad Ali had been dying slowly for 3 decades, his body gradually shutting down, while his spirit remained unbroken. The funeral was held in Louisville, Kentucky, his hometown. Thousands lined the streets to watch the procession. Former presidents gave eulogies. Athletes and activists and people from all walks of life came to pay their respects. But perhaps the most moving tribute came not from any speech, but from a simple image displayed at the service. It was a photograph from 1996. Muhammad Ali, standing alone at the top of the Olympic Stadium, torch in his trembling hands, flame held high. Below the image, a single caption, "The greatest." Because that's what the Atlanta Olympics proved. Not that Ali was the greatest boxer, though he was. Not that he was the greatest showman, though he was that too. But that he possessed the greatest quality any human being can have. The refusal to be defeated by circumstances beyond his control, the courage to show the world your weakness and call it strength. Today, the Olympic cauldron from the 1996 Atlanta Games has been moved to a permanent location in the city's Centennial Olympic Park. Tourists visited daily, taking photos, reading the plaques that explain its history. And every single one of those plaques mentions Muhammad Ali, the man who lit the flame, the man who showed the world that even when your hands shake, even when your voice fails, even when your body betrays you, your spirit can still soar. Medical researchers continue to study Parkinson's disease, searching for better treatments, for a cure. Every advance they make, every patient they help, stands as a testament to the awareness that Ali brought to the condition. His willingness to be seen, to be vulnerable, to show the reality of the disease rather than hide from it, changed how millions of people understood Parkinson's. It gave faces to the statistics, humanity to the diagnosis. Athletes today speak of Ali's influence, but not in the way you might expect. They don't talk about his boxing technique or his ring strategy. They talk about that night in Atlanta, about what it meant to see someone at their lowest point choose courage over comfort, choose dignity over pity, choose to fight one more time even when the battle was already lost. That's the legacy of July 19, 1996. Not a boxing match, not a sporting event, but a moment when 3 billion people saw what the human spirit looks like when it refuses to quit, when it stands before the world, trembling and diminished, and lights a flame anyway. Muhammad Ali's hands were shaking that night in Atlanta. They shook as he held the torch. They shook as he lit the flame. They shook as he stood before the largest audience in human history. But his spirit never wavered, not for a second, not ever. And that, more than any championship belt, more than any victory in the ring, more than any record or accolade, is why he will always be the greatest.